Hello, my friends. It is so great to see you here tonight. I'm so sorry things have been so sketchy lately. I've been working on a job contract for a short-term freelancing job. It's taking up so much time, and I've been wanting to get better equipment. And I also need to get a better internet connection because I can't download more than like 30 minutes now. In fact, right now I can't download more than probably like 15 or 20 minutes if unless I have like a day to download it. So I'm working on getting everything better. Funds are kind of tight right now. So I haven't been able to get the equipment and the upgrades that I need. I'm probably going to start like a Patreon thing to try and help with that. At any rate, I wanted to definitely come back and talk to you tonight, at least briefly. And this is probably only going to be for like 20 minutes, like I said, because it's takes a really long time to download the recording. I'm going to be working on setting up a live streaming thing on YouTube so that I can actually live stream at the same time, so that we can actually, you can ask questions in the chat and I'll be able to answer them like in real time. But that's down the road. So I'm working on all this stuff, but I'm not there yet. So thanks for being patient with me and thanks for being here. Today, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about one of the most controversial figures in both the Catholic Church and the history of paranormal research in the modern era. This is someone that I have been following for a very long time. He is deceased now, but his influence continues to be felt everywhere and continues to influence popular culture and what people are talking about, both in the supernatural and the supernatural aspect of the Catholic Church and Catholic culture, and non-supernatural aspects of the Catholic Church and culture as well. Indeed, he is a man, a scholar, a researcher, a theologian who seemed to be involved in at the highest levels of the Catholic Church, and also at the highest levels of the Catholic Church's involvement in people's dealings with the devil. He was an exorcist, and he wrote very significantly about exorcisms, including a New York Times best-selling book called Hostage to the Devil, which, if you followed me at all on social media when I was on Facebook and such, you saw me always recommending this book. I think I even offered to buy it for you if you couldn't afford it, because I thought it was so important for you to read it. So we're going to be talking about this tonight, as well as some other things about the life of Malachi Martin, who is a very, like I said, extremely controversial figure in the history of the supernatural and of the Catholic Church, and someone that I'm still on the fence with in a lot of ways. Love him, and for some reasons don't like him so much for other reasons. And you'll find that this is the general consensus for most people who follow Malachi Martin, that we still aren't quite sure what was going on with him, but that certainly you cannot deny how influential he was and still is, not only in the study of the supernatural, but in the study of the Catholic Church. So I first learned about Malachi Martin when I was probably in high school. And I didn't know I was learning about Malachi Martin at the time. I just know that I heard this overheard conversation, and it stuck with me for many, many, many years. And it was only years later that I discovered, I mean, literally like 20 something years later, that I discovered that what I was hearing newly was what I had heard a long time ago. And so I was in high school, and it was a conversation that I overheard between my brother and one of his friends. Now, my brother had attended a Jesuit high school in Chicago called St. Ignatius. St. Ignatius was the original Loyola University, still active on the west side of Chicago, although it had a period of time in the 1980s where it was going to be torn down because it was in very bad repair, dated back to before the Great Chicago Fire. And this sort of miraculous thing happened where not only the school, but also Holy Family Church, which was the parish church going back also to before the Great Fire, was saved, where both of these institutions were saved from destruction by all of these supporters and donors that came like out of the woodwork from around the world to save these structures. You might have read about St. Ignatius and Holy Family in my books, if you follow my books, because Father Damon, the Belgian Jesuit priest who founded both of the institutions, had this very supernatural sort of life at the parish. And so there are several great Chicago ghost stories that are tied to the school. And you might have also read that my brother seems to have seen the ghost of Father Damon, a prolific spirit there, when he was a student there back in the 1980s. At any rate, one of my brother's good friends was a guy named Brian, who was very into like Catholic Church, like theology and history, and also very into like conspiracy theories about the church that, of course, we all love, right? What this series is kind of, a lot of what the series is about. So one day Brian was over and I overheard my brother and him talking, and they were talking about what I now know was this book, Hostage to the Devil by Malachi Martin. But what I had heard about the conversation was just about one of the stories in the book. Now, this book, Hostage to the Devil, the subtitle is The Possession and Exorcism of 5 Contemporary Americans. And according to, what the book is about, Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit priest and an exorcist, Catholic exorcist, wrote these 5 true stories about 5 possessions and exorcisms that had happened in the 20th century in the United States. So each one of these stories is about a possession victim and the exorcist who came to perform the exorcism on the person, the victim. And there are very different cases. Like there's one that took place in Asia during World War II on this horrifically possessed victim who had become this horribly violent killer and cannibal. There's another that's about, I believe it was a young man in Chicago who had questions about his sexuality and his gender, who has intercourse with a dead body that he comes across, and he becomes involved in the occult, and so on and so forth. So there's these 5 different cases, and it's very interesting how Malachi Martin presents them, because he presents the idea of possession and exorcism as this journey that takes place before the possession victim is born and before the exorcist is born. And throughout their lives, they are on a, like a crash course towards each other. And it ends in this inevitable clash that happens between the victim and the exorcist and the devil, of course. And, or rather the victim and the devil and the exorcist and God. So there's this, and Jesus. And so there's this inevitable conflict that happens, and the victim and the exorcist are on this course for this battle from the time before they're born. So it's very interesting the way that he portrays this. And in writing the book, Malachi Martin allegedly he used the actual recordings of the exorcisms. The exorcisms are usually recorded not only for legal purposes now, but also for training purposes and things like this, evidence, etc. So the story that Brian was talking about with my brother way back in the 1980s when we were all in high school was one of the stories in the book that is, the story is entitled Uncle Ponto and the Mushroom Super. And Uncle Ponto was the name of a so-called familiar spirit that had possessed a young man who was involved in radio broadcasting. His name was Jamsey in the book. And the Mushroom Super was the nickname that Malachi Martin gave the exorcist, who was a priest who was known for his famous mushroom soup recipe that he would cook for all of his friends. So this is the story of the conflict between this familiar spirit, Uncle Ponto, and the mushroom super, the exorcist, who came to exorcise this familiar spirit from this young man. And I remember through my life after high school, how this chilling story that Brian told my brother about this particular possession and exorcism. This young man, Jamsey, had come to be possessed by this, what we call familiar spirit. And you might be familiar with this term if you're interested in demonology or even, you know, or exorcism or even, you know, kind of the history of the United States, because familiar spirits were talked about a lot in the Salem witch trials. A familiar spirit, and we talked about this too when we talked about the Bell Witch haunting or possession, whatever it was, because the Bell Witch was believed by many to have been a familiar spirit of the neighbor Kate Batts. So a familiar spirit is believed to be a spirit that's attached to someone, you know, like we've talked about it being attached to a witch and doing the witch's bidding. But a familiar can be attached to a person. And so this can be a spirit that possesses someone. The thing that I remembered so vividly about Brian telling my brother was that at some point, you know, the spirit of Uncle Ponto purported to be, you know, on Jamsey's side, on the side of this person that he was, that the spirit was possessing. You know, he wanted to help his career. He wanted to help his personal life. He wanted to be a friend to him. He wanted to be there for him. And, you know, at first, you know, it was kind of cool and, you know, liked having him around. It was great to have him or someone around all the time, someone helping him out. And then it started to be kind of, you know, relentless. And then the guard came down and the mask came off, and Jamsey started to realize that this spirit was not on his side. And there was this pivotal moment in the story where Jamsey had put up was really interesting too, because this was evocative of this ghost story in Chicago that probably a lot of you know about, which is the story of the Devil Baby at Hull House. Jamsey had come home and he had this picture up of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and he found that the eyes had been cut out of the picture. This was evocative of the story of the story that's told of Hull House and the Devil Baby at Hull House here in Chicago, where, according to the legend, the husband, who was angry about his wife's pregnancy, tore down this picture of the Blessed Mother that was in the house because he was furious about the birth of the child and his wife's Catholic devotion. At any rate, I always remembered this vivid detail that my brother's friend told about this story. And so years later, when I found this book as a paranormal researcher that I'd become, you know, years after high school, and I started to read it, I came to the story of Uncle Ponto and the mushroom super, and I started to read it, and I realized, I came across that scene, and I realized that this was the book that Brian had been talking about all the way back in the 1980s. And I came to find, because I had bought this book probably in the late 1990s, and I thought it was a new release. And then I found out that it was a re-release, and the book had actually been released originally in the 1970s. So I began to do some research on this. What I found out was a former Jesuit priest who wrote Hostage to the Devil, Malachi Martin. Let me point out right now, Malachi Martin always said that his name was actually pronounced Malachi. And so he was always correcting people for that. But then later on, he started to call himself Malachi Martin too. So if you hear, you know, YouTube interviews and stuff with Malachi Martin, you might hear him refer to himself as Malachi or Malachi, and you hear all kinds of people refer to him as one or the other. So it's the same person, and we still don't know. It's very indicative of kind of Malachi's personality, because you could never really pin down like what was true and what wasn't, you know, even from him. So it's kind of funny, even with his name. At any rate, I began to look into who was this mysterious former Jesuit priest was. And I found a lot of really interesting things about him. Malachi Martin was born in County Kerry in Ireland. So he's a typical like Irish local country priest, but he came to be just this international kind of superstar of the Catholic Church, and he was involved with the church at the highest levels. And so people look at him and say, like, well, if anybody knows what's going on in the Catholic Church, or over the late 20th century and up till now, it was Malachi Martin, because he was right there through these pivotal events in the church. And he seems to even be there right now, because so many of the things that he predicted were going to come out have come out and continue to come out. Couple interesting things about him. He's considered to be a genius by both his supporters and detractors. Everyone said he was the smartest person they ever met, huge IQ, total genius, and over many fields, not just theology, but many different fields of study. And among those was paleontology. And he was an accomplished paleontologist who did a lot of work in the Middle East. And many people say that he was the inspiration for William Peter Blatty when he wrote The Exorcist. So you know how The Exorcist starts in the Middle East with the excavations and the elderly priest who is involved in the archaeological digs. According to many, that was based on inspired by Malachi Martin. In 1958, Malachi Martin he was in Rome, and he became the personal secretary to Cardinal Bea. And Cardinal Bea was reportedly the confessor of Pope Pius. And the confessor, if you're not Catholic, a confessor is someone that you regularly go to confession to. So you can go to confession to like a different priest every time, right? But many people find that it's helpful to have a confessor, the same priest that you go to all the time, because then that priest is familiar with your struggles and your sins, your problematic sins, your spiritual journey. So it's a lot helpful. Can be a lot more helpful. So he had become Malachi Martin had become the personal secretary to the confessor of the Pope. So he was right there, with like the cardinal who was actually hearing the confessions of the Pope. So he was that close to the Pope. This is the time period when a lot of the controversy about Malachi Martin and a lot of the supernaturalism surrounding Malachi Martin comes into play, because he says he becomes involved with the third secret of Fatima, which we talked about a few weeks back when we talked about the consecration of Russia that just happened involved with the Ukraine war just recently. So remember, we did that episode where we talked about the supernaturalism of the war in Ukraine, possibility of that, and the consecration of Russia that was done by Pope Francis recently. And so we talked about the idea that when it was announced, I believe it was Pope Benedict announced the third secret of Fatima, that many people believed that this wasn't the real secret, or it wasn't the whole secret, and that there was more to this, but we kind of don't, it was thought that it was better for us if we didn't know, better for the world if we didn't know. And many people believe that this is because the third secret is about the end of the world. It's about the apocalypse, about global catastrophe. And that it's better if we just don't know about it. Okay. So that's the current thing. And that's the conspiracy theory about the third secret of Fatima. Well, Malachi Martin, in 1958, 1959, is the personal secretary to Cardinal Bea, the confessor to the current Pope. And he's also working in Rome at the time, right around that time period, when John the 23rd becomes the next Pope. And John the 23rd is very anti-Fatima. He thinks the message of Fatima is like a downer, negative. And he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to make it public. He just wants to be progressive and happy and think about the future. So around this time, Malachi Martin has made his way, as we said, to, the highest the highest rooms, the most secret rooms of the Catholic Church and the Vatican. And Malachi Martin goes on to claim later that he was literally like, carrying a tray of coffee in the hallway outside the door when the secrets of Fatima were translated out loud to Pope John the 23rd. And so he claims he overheard what the third secret of Fatima is. And he claimed to his death that he knew what the real third secret was, but he too would not disclose what it was. He only said, I think, that if it ever comes out that, that someone announces what it is and it's not what it is, then I will say that, but I'm not going to just say what it is. And he never really said why he wouldn't say that. And a lot of people criticize him for that and say he was lying because of that. I'm on the fence. I don't know. Maybe the same reason, the higher ups never revealed it is the same reason he didn't want to reveal it, because it's just too much for us to deal with, or whatever, end of the world apocalypse stuff. I don't know. Anyway, but that's how Malachi Martin became involved with the third secret of Fatima and started to become known as someone who knew about these conspiratorial things that were allegedly going on in the church, including the coming total sexual abuse scandal nightmare, the Vatican bank scandal, and everything else, including the current accusations that many of the bishops in the Catholic Church are Satanists who actually participate in satanic masses. And this is something that I'm going to get to in just a few minutes. Okay, so moving on. Malachi Martin eventually becomes known as this famous exorcist. He writes hostage to the devil, and he becomes known as this famous exorcist who is a what we call laicized priest. Now, Malachi Martin, when you laicize a priest, it means that you remove them, you return them to like the civil world, so they're no longer a priest. So their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience are removed, and they're no longer associated with whatever order they were associated with. Now, Malachi Martin was a Jesuit priest, so he was associated with the Jesuits. He claimed that he was never really laicized, but that he asked to be released from his vows of poverty and obedience, because he no longer wanted to be a priest in the order, and he no longer he wanted to be able to make money to support himself out in the world. But he claimed that he always retained his vow of chastity, which we'll get to in a minute, because this is a big part of the controversy about Malachi Martin. So he goes on to become a famous guest on the Art Bell show, which I'm sure a lot of you guys listen to, and maybe still listen to now in recording since Art Bell's death. And he did many episodes of the Art Bell show where he was on, the entire night or early morning, 4 or 5 hours with Art Bell, talking about exorcism and possession, talking about the Jesuit order, talking about the Catholic Church, the papacy, the alleged murder of the first Pope John Paul I, who was only in office for about a month. So he goes on to write a lot of these pivotal books that are very timely, such as this book, The Jesuits, about how the order that he had pledged to way back when, I think in the 1930s, in Ireland, had grown from being this great intellectual and theological and missionary organization to this organization that he claimed was behind a lot of the downfall of the Catholic Church. And it's interesting because a lot of people point to Pope Francis now, who's a Jesuit priest, and who many people believe has caused this great schism in the church with heresies and so on and so forth. So Malachi Martin becomes involved in what we call the sedevacantist movement. And this is a movement, or people say schism, rightly so, in the church, where there are a number of people that call themselves sedevacantists who have broken away from the Catholic Church. They believe that all of the popes that have been elected since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s are false popes, including Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II, etc. And they believe that the Second Vatican Council was a false council, that all of the changes that were done with Vatican II, including the elimination of the Latin traditional Mass, bringing the laity and women more into the Mass and the liturgies, etc., that these are all parts of a falsehood that was put forth with the Second Vatican Council. And so Malachi Martin becomes associated with the Sedevacantist movement. And I don't know if he ever became a part of that. I don't know if he was a priest in the movement or anything official like that. But he does become involved with this exorcism kind of culture, this possession and exorcism culture that includes people like Ed and Lorraine Warren. And so you see Ed and Lorraine Warren associated with Malachi Martin. Also a friend of mine, Ralph Sarchi, a former New York police sergeant who was trained to be an exorcist under Malachi Martin and Ed and Lorraine Warren, among others, who is a sedevacantist. So you see this kind of like culture come up in the United States around possession and exorcism that has this certain camp of people that are associated with sedevacantism, including Malachi Martin, who again is no longer a Jesuit priest, but he's performing exorcisms apparently. So how is he actually doing that? So it's kind of interesting. So again, he goes on to write a number of books. He writes a book called The Final Conclave, which is about the so-called alleged murder of Pope John Paul I. He writes a book called The Keys of This Blood, which is a lot about globalism and the Catholic Church. He writes the book about the Jesuits, and he writes a book called Windswept House, which is it's a novel. But many people believe that it's it was written as a novel to thinly veil the players in the book, the characters in the book who are real people. And a lot of these players were people that were deeply involved in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church throughout the 1990s, including Chicago Cardinal Joseph Bernardin. And the opening scenes of Windswept House actually portray a satanic mass that occurred in, I believe, the 1960s. And many people have come to believe that this was a satanic mass that was presided over by Cardinal Joseph Bernardin. And you see stuff about this even in the current news, because according to a lot, I guess Cardinal Supich, the current Cardinal of Chicago, is covering up some of the parts of the abuse scandal in Chicago, and that he did not give to the FBI during their investigation the reports of Cardinal Bernardin's alleged sexual abuses. So it's interesting to see how there seem to be threads of this that are still coming through to the current time, that started in as being portrayed in Windswept House by Malachi Martin many years ago now. So according to that book, there is a big faction of Satanism at the highest levels of the church, including not only by many of the bishops, purported Satanists, but also in the Vatican itself. And we've had reports of these satanic orgies and such that have come out of Roman news in the last years. Many people purporting that the sexual abuse scandal especially involving young children, homosexual aspects of it, all are involved and connected to this satanic aspect or this satanic strain that's come out in the church at these high levels in the last part of the 20th century and here into the 21st century. So let's see what else. Okay, so recently you might have seen, I think it was maybe about 4 years ago now, Netflix released a documentary called Hostage to the Devil. And it's a great documentary. I've seen it probably about 6 times now. And it's a documentary really about Malachi Martin, his mysterious life and things that he was apparently involved in. And it has a lot of people who knew him and worked with him talking about him, including good friends of his, people that were involved in exorcisms with him, including my friend Ralph Sarchi, who, like I said, was trained by him and worked on exorcisms with him. It also features a man named Robert Blair, who was also a Jesuit priest who worked in Rome during the time when Malachi Martin was there. They were good friends. And he was also laicized. So he left the priesthood and he married a woman named Sue Kaiser. Now, Robert Blair was a journalist, and he was Time Magazine's correspondent in Vatican City. And it was during this time, he knew Malachi Martin. They ran in the same circles. They had dinner parties together, cocktail parties together. And after his marriage, Robert Blair went on to accuse Malachi Martin of having an affair with his wife. And at the time of the accusation, his wife was pregnant, and it was never really said if Robert Blair was accusing of Malachi Martin of being the father of the child or not. And I still haven't heard anything like that. Nevertheless, Robert Blair appears in the Netflix documentary Hostage of the Devil, undermining, most of Malachi Martin's work, calling him a rounder, a womanizer, a liar, a cheat. And, kind of trying to unravel all of the support and, fangirl stuff, really, and fanboy stuff around Malachi Martin, who has so many fervent followers even today. And he really has become a big, really aligned with, and again, he's passed away now years ago. So this is not really, we don't know if this would be of his choosing, but he's really become a big part of the traditionalist Catholic Church movement, where we call up a lot of his ideas and predictions and say, see, Malachi Martin said this was going to happen, and it's happened. So at any rate, the documentary is great, Hostage to the Devil. Nothing is really, there's no real conclusions in it. But what we find out in the documentary is that when Malachi Martin passed away, what happened, there's kind of a little shadiness around what actually happened. I think he told his secretary that he was reaching for a book on a bookshelf and he was on a chair or something. And he claimed that the chair was pulled out from him, or his leg was pulled out from under him by this unseen force. And there are other reports that he, fell down the stairs in a wheelchair or something like this. So there's all these different reports. And with it, he had an accident and he died of complications from injuries from the accident. Now, there was an exorcism case that was going on at the time that involved this young girl. And apparently all of the, active exorcists on the East Coast were familiar with this possession case of this little girl. It's a very bad case, a very severe case. And Malachi Martin was involved in it. And many of his closest friends and colleagues believe that he was targeted in this exorcism by the devil. And it was the devil that killed him so that he could not perform this, continue to perform this exorcism. We talked about how often exorcisms have to go through a series of exorcisms, sometimes lasting weeks or months or years. So we're not sure how far along this exorcism was. We knew that it had started, but at some point, Malachi Martin left the scene of the case of the exorcism and was no longer involved in it because of his death. So it remains a great mystery. Now, this is, the background of Malachi Martin. I really encourage you to go on YouTube and listen to as much as you can of those interviews with Art Bell that cover a lot of different topics. I also encourage you to read Hostage to the Devil and to watch the Netflix documentary. I'll put those links in the description to this video. And then next week, we are going to be talking about the work of one of Malachi Martin's proteges, I guess you would call him. He certainly said Father Martin was his mentor. And this is the work of a psychiatrist named Scott Peck. And I don't know if you guys have read this book, The People of the Lie by Dr. Peck. It is one of the pivotal works of psychiatry from the 20th century. And it remains an important, pivotal book, must-read book for anybody who is interested in the the overlap between psychiatry and mental illness and possession and exorcism. And we're going to be talking about this book and the work of Dr. Peck next week, and how Dr. Martin or Father Martin and Dr. Peck's paths crossed and how their work intersected and overlapped. So next week, join me back for People of the Lie. This is not a book club, but if you want to read it in advance, even better. And then too, if you've read anything else, heard any interviews from Malachi Martin or started to read some of his books or seen the Netflix documentary by then, we can also talk about that. So I'll be live just as I am right now in the chat to answer any questions, and we are add to the discussion about that. And until then, I hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for stopping by. Whenever you're hearing this, you can always contact me, Ursula Bielski, at ursulabielski@sbcglobal.net with any questions and comments. I'd love to share any of your questions and comments here on the show. So make sure you stop by. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and hit that notification bell so that you get notified whenever we put up a new video. I'm Ursula Bielski with Ursula Bielski's World of the Supernatural, here for this present darkness. Till we meet again, I'll see you next time. Take care.